Here's a quick walkthrough. I've got this app open. When I opened it up, I came to terminal and I ran npm run dev, which is the first thing the README told me to do. So that runs the project, and then it's running here. And I've got this click me, which turns items on and off. If it's me and I'm looking at the code, I might just want to see how this works. So we've got toggle state, use state true. And then we have this render light switch, which turns things on and turns things off if toggle, depending on the value of toggle. And then button sets the value of toggle to not toggle. So for example, if I were to start this with false, it now begins off and then turns on. And if I were to change these bits of text here, that would simplify that. So we can see I'm returning some markup based on a conditional statement there. Anything I add here will show up regardless of the state. So the conditional markup always happens inside of a function. And that's kind of a key concept. There are other ways to do this in React, but we want to keep things simple. So we're going to put the conditional markup inside a function no matter what. All right, so let's take a look at my plan for my project. So I made a flow chart. We have to collect options for each category, write them out in a grid, get a magic number, count forward. I am just making MASH. So here's the flow chart for MASH. Then I drew a wireframe. So I planned we're going to lay out a set of inputs for each item. Then we're going to go to a magic number picker, and then we're going to display the options and all of that. But for today, all I'm going to do is try to get this first step working. So the enter four names. So like an easy thing, I could just come into here, and I could change this to my MASH game. Now, an important concept here is that, remember, I'm going to be making multiple different screens. So the React code will run no matter where you are in your game. So for example, this H1 MASH game, because it's at the top of my app, is always going to show up. So no matter what page I'm on, it's going to say MASH game. So since in my drawing, if I want everything else to change, everything else will need to be in some kind of conditional rendering. So the first step would be, I'm going to need some kind of state, like the toggle, to say, hey, what page am I on, right, of my app? So an easy way to do that would be to change this toggle to something like page set page, and I will just use state 1, and I'll just change these numbers when I want to change the page. Then my render light switch will become something like render category chooser, and I can do if page equals 1, and then that would render the first page. So now I could come into here and I could say render category chooser, and that's only going to have any output when we are on the first page. So now enter some data. All right, and if I come back here, oops. I forgot to return it. Return, enter some data. It should return it. I can also open this side by side to make it a little easier to see. Shrink this. and I appear to have made a mistake already. What did I do? So if we make a mistake, that's pretty common. I'm going to go ahead and run into the inspector. Oh, I was still referencing toggle somewhere in my app. Oh, right there. I left the toggle there. There we go. So now we can see we've got an enter some data that works. And we've got a few different options we could do here. One option would be to call a second function when we're done with that page. So I could set up, for example, const render magic number page. And that would say enter a magic number. And this could say, if I'm not rendering a magic chooser, I'm going to render my magic number page. There's a lot of ways you could organize this, so you don't have to do it this way. This is just one way it makes sense. And if I wanted to, so I can go ahead and put these empty tags around, which will make it easier to add more content. And I'm just going to add, oh yeah, it's suggesting this for me. So onClick equals set page 2. Next, a button that would go to the, oops, that should not be in there. Sorry about that. That should be here. Let's try this again. Enter data. And then this one would set page 2.3. All right, so now we're at the enter data, and when we're done with it, we go to the magic number page. And I forgot to return it. Return. Try that again. Enter magic number. And then we go to the third page, which isn't yet written. So I sort of got the page stuff working as my first step, but I actually failed to do the first page. So conceptually, we're going to break our code into pieces. More properly in React, you would make these all components. We're going to use sub-functions, which is an unusual technique, but will work. So right now, when I click the next button, it just sets the page to 2. That is not actually what we want. We're going to want to go ahead and set up our categories and our input items. So what I'm going to say is the first thing, const category set category equals, and maybe I start with names. So now instead of enter data, I would say enter category. And now it'll say enter names. Very good. So I created a new piece of state. And we're going to change this on button to a function. So we'll do like on next category. And we can then add our first function for a button. So const on next category equals. And this is recommending a set of options like that, which kind of works, but I'm going to actually recommend we do something different later. We'll just start with something really simple. So we'll do if category is names, set category to jobs, and else set page to 2. So now we would go enter names, enter jobs, and then enter magic number. So that is working. All right, the next step is to set up the inputs for the categories, for the current category. So any given input is going to have a state. So we could do something like category inputs, set category inputs, and that's going to be just a list of 4 empty strings. So now I'm going to need to create inputs for 4 empty strings. And this is a good example of a place where AI can be really helpful. So now we're going to go ahead and see if we can get some help from ChatGPT. In an earlier version of this tutorial, I tried getting help earlier, and GPT made some mistakes and kind of was a little too quick to the gun. So here's my hope. If we're going to get GPT help, I recommend, I've got a blurb in the README right here. I'm going to copy that blurb, and I would always start with that blurb because that's me telling ChatGPT what we are doing. And then I will say, here is my code so far with a comment for where I'm looking for help. And I actually recommend this as a way to get help from AI. I just literally went into the code and I wrote here, GPT, create inputs for 4 category inputs. I'm going to go ahead and copy my full code. I did a Control A, Control C. And now I've given it my full code so far. And let's see how it does with that. All right, so it says you already have the category input state, which will hold the inputs. And then it says, in your render category chooser, replace the placeholder comment with this. So render inputs for category inputs. And it's going to give me div category inputs map value index, div key equals index, label input index +1, input type equals value, on change, on input change, e index. So we're going to start with that. And anytime we're copying in code from an AI, I'm going to actually just change this comment to help from ChatGPT. What is the current GPT version? It's just called ChatGPT. Okay, great. And this should, oh, interesting. It's not auto formatting. So we'll notice that immediately added the inputs. But we're not done. GPT also said we want to create input changes. So new inputs, update, and set input. Go ahead. And I'm going to add that to my... All right, and I'm actually going to recommend we don't call it on input change because our app is going to have a lot. So if you right click, you can rename the symbol. I'm going to say on category, well, it's not really on the category, on category item input change. I'm just going to change it to. And now it's kind of clear what I'm doing. So now I can type in 4 names. I probably don't want it to say input 1. I'll just have it say 1. There we go. And yeah, I probably want a little space after it. There we go. So Tom, Fred, Mary, Beth. Great. And now we'll notice when I click next, it doesn't clear the inputs. So the next question is, what would I do when I click next? So that then is a little bit of a tricky question. The other thing I'm noticing here is this. I thought I'd added all the plugins, but it is not doing prettier. Let's see. I guess if I do get some format document. All right, we'll have to figure out why the auto formatter isn't working. That's going to be very annoying. Just want to indent this nicely. All right. pretty good. So we can now copy that into GPT and paste it. And then we can ask it for help. I just want to practice this to see how well it does. So how should I approach moving from one category to the next? I'd like to be able to edit a list of categories, or I'd like to have a list of categories my game asks about, like jobs, number of children, etc. So we'll see what GPT suggests. All right, so it suggests a list of categories, which again, that's kind of the goal of this project, is to learn lists. So here's its recommendation. Create an array of categories and track the current category index with state. So GPT does exactly what I would have told you to do. So here we have a list of categories, and then we have the current category index. So I'll go ahead and copy that code in. I'll get rid of the stuff that says example. Help with category index from GPT. All right, and then we're going to update our logic to use the category index. So instead of doing this if statement that I put in as a placeholder, it's going to have this next category. So it's going to say add one to the category index and then move it up. It is kind of losing track of something though, which is, so it's going to increase the category, but it's not going to keep the data. And here it recommends updating category inputs. So it's not quite how I would do it, and I do want to actually walk you through this. So I'm going to take this idea, but I'm just going to implement it myself to show you a little bit how I would do it. So notice we've kept the inputs here. That's the current inputs, right? We're going to also want state for all the inputs. And that will just start as an empty list. So that's our list of every input we have in the state. And then when we run the next category, we're also saving the category, right? So we're going to change this code. So save the current category. And actually currently I have the CodeMonkey, the GitHub Copilot, which is why it's auto completing all this for me, but I'll go ahead and type it myself. So basically what I'm going to be doing is adding to all inputs. So I'm going to say, remember, we always want to make a new variable. So new input data equals, and then ... all inputs will copy the old data. And we then want to add the current category to it, category inputs. And then we're going to set all inputs to the new input data. So that would be adding our input data. And then we want to set category inputs for the next one to 4 empty strings. We'll clear out the ones. And then we're going to move to the next category. So we're going to set the category index to current category index +1. And the final step is we're going to check if current category index is greater than or equal to the category's length. We're going to move on to page 2. All right, so at that point, I apparently made a typo, but otherwise we should be good. Nope, I didn't make a typo. All right. So now I should be able to enter the items. One thing that's missing here is we're not seeing the output, so I might just want to add. I often do this in my apps, is I just do a little debug section where I add information that I want to see. So like the current category inputs, and then all the inputs. So if I come down here, I can see right now I've entered nothing. So as I work this game, I would say like Joe, Jane, Jimmy, Josephine. And apparently the next button doesn't work. Perhaps I didn't make it work. Let's see. On next category, next. On next category. So that should be working. Let's see what I did wrong. And I'm going to open it here where I have an inspector. Joe, Jane, Jimmy. Oops. Next. All right. I made a typo. All input is not defined. That should have... Oh, there was an underline. I just didn't see it. So my editor should show me when I make those mistakes. All inputs. There we go. So now I can see when I click next, all inputs becomes that list there. Interesting. My categories, I would have expected to change there. Oh, because the category here, I used a separate state. So actually, rather than having a state for category, now that I have the categories list, I can just make category based on the category index. That's kind of cleaner. All right, I got my 4 names. Oh, set category is not defined. Where did I call set category? Oh, wow. That should be set category inputs. That's funny. I'm making typos left and right. I blame the AI. All right, beautiful. So now, hold on, let's start this fresh. And now I get jobs. All right. And I can see these are now all being stored in that array at the bottom. Okay. All right. Looks like I was off by 1. Oh yeah, it's because when the category index is greater than or equal to categories length minus 1 is when I should move on. There we go. So I fixed that up now. So now we have an example of how we could build the first page. That is a complete first page. And I've got 4 entries for names. My next works, I can kind of see the all inputs working. Just another example of like making this a little bit clearer. If I took this code and just copy paste again the code into GPT, then I can just say, hey, can you make my debug display of all inputs prettier? There we go. It has just prettied up my whole little debug section because I thought that looked kind of bad. And apparently I pasted in 2 divs by mistake. That run underline helps that there. So GPT, I asked it to cite itself. It really does not want to cite itself. So you'll have to be kind of good about citing whenever it makes improvements. And it's a little bit of a question mark when you have to cite. I would say if you're getting the level of help I'm getting right now from GPT, somewhere in your app, it should definitely say where there's help from GPT. And you need to be looking at, it's much better to go in, put in a comment and say, I don't understand this, please help me with this, get help there, and then cite that help versus having GPT like write everything, which you really won't learn much. So now let's see if that input is prettier. So if I go ahead and I'll do Owen, Kanya, Sheba, and Dev. Next, there are my names, enter jobs, and I will do teacher, coder, carpenter, firefighter. And we'll see I made that a little prettier. So I can see it is in fact keeping track of all the lists. I'm building my 4 lists up. And I don't care about cars. So when I'm done, we get to this page that I haven't written yet. So that's a great example. I've walked through really the first step of this. Not only did I build the user interface, but I have shown that I have a way to move between pages. I have put my items into their own functions. So I've got on next category and on category item input change are the 2 things my user can do. They can type here and they can click next. So there's going to be typically a function per input. And then I've got render category chooser for this kind of part of my application. And then I've got render magic number page for this next part of my application. And I just put the debug in here. It actually would probably be clean if I put that into its own function as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just move this whole debug code there. And in the future, I would remove that, right? But that's really useful to just see while I'm coding, I can see what the heck is going on. So, you know, this is like one line to remove. If I just delete that line, it's gone. And now it's back. So my app itself looks relatively clean. And then I can call functions to organize each part of my app. And I can think about how functions call other functions to figure out my if-then logic. I would say if you're designing your program, try to limit yourself to one level of if-then. So never go like if. Always separate that out into separate functions. And then if each function only has one level of if, it'll be pretty easy to read. Maybe 2 levels if you add some more nuanced logic. But ideally, once you're beyond 2 levels of if statements, you want to go ahead and make changes. Last thing I'm going to do is just commit these changes. So I'm going to come in here and type a message. So got category chooser and basic page system working. Commit that and sync. Okay. And final step, if I come to my demo, if I go to settings, pages, I believe, actually, does it already have GitHub Actions? I think if we just say GitHub Actions, it'll build. Let's see. It tried to build and it failed. That's because I didn't enable pages. So I think if I rerun, now that I just went to settings and said build from GitHub Actions, I think this deploy script will now work. You can do that early in the project, and then every time you commit, you can actually see your final code running. Here it goes, deploying. And while I'm waiting for that, just to show you again, I came into settings, I went to pages, and I chose the source as GitHub Actions, and that's what did it. I already have the action for this thing set up. This is still in progress. Should be done in just a minute. Very nice. And there's my currently deployed item. If you have logged into GPT, you can actually get a chat link. Copy that link. And I can then go in to my app. And I can paste that link. Helps setting up categories. So that's like a very nice way to cite it. You really want to be in the habit of citing your work whenever you work with GPT. That'll make it so that I can log in and actually see what conversation you had. And again, I'm trying to evaluate how effective a coding teacher this can be. The challenge is you really have to look over it closely. And for example, let's say that I had a question. I could say here, can you explain what UL and LI mean here, and what's IDX? So if you don't understand what something is, it'll go in and break down every bit of the code. And this is why I really think AI has the potential to be transformational, because it can teach you. And you can go in and ask more questions like, what's interrupted here? What does categories index do? And here it breaks down what those do. And this is like a really clear and thorough explanation. So highly recommend trying out some help from AI. But again, the more you give it, the better it is. And the more follow-up questions you ask, the better they do. All right.